Northern Ireland, 1920 to 1985. Background: the state of Northern Ireland came into being in 1902 with the Government of Ireland Act. At 26 counties, Southern Ireland, originally the Irish Free State, was now the Republic of Ireland. A sixth county, Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland had its own parliament and made its own laws, but was still a part of the United Kingdom. Unionist opinion on NI. Unionists were mostly Protestant. They were pleased at the setting up of Northern Ireland, as they wanted to stay united with Britain. As Protestants were in the majority in the new state, this meant that they could control the government. Nationalist opinion on NI. Nationalists were mainly Catholic. They were not pleased with Northern Ireland as they had wanted to be part of a united, independent Ireland. As Catholics were in a minority, they felt that they had little power to influence the government's decisions. 5 ways Unionists discriminated against Catholics. In 1922, the Special Powers Act was brought in. These allowed arrests to be happen without trial. Majority of who were arrested were nationalists. Changes made to electoral boundaries to ensure Unionist control of local councils, even if the majority was nationalist. This was called gerrymandering. Only people who could pay rates could vote in elections. The amount of votes per person depended on the amount of rates you paid. Maximum of 7 votes per person, and because Protestants tended to be wealthier, the more votes they got. Catholics were given fewer houses than Protestants by Unionist-controlled councils, as ownership of a house gave a vote in the general election. Catholics were less likely to have a job rather than a Protestant. Relations with Southern Ireland. The relations were never good. The 1937 Constitution for Southern Ireland declared that the north and south of Ireland should be one country. Between 1956 and 1962, the IRA launched a campaign of attack on border areas. Even though the campaign failed because Northern Ireland nationalists did not support it, the Unionist government still felt Northern Catholics could not be trusted. The government of Captain Terence O'Neill, 1963 to 1969. Captain Terence O'Neill became Prime Minister of Northern Ireland in 1963. He was a member of the official Unionist Party, OUP, which was the main political party in Northern Ireland. O'Neill had it though from the beginning because many people in the party had not wanted him as their leader. They wanted Brian Faulkner as leader instead. O'Neill's economic policies. The aims of O'Neill's economic policies were to take Northern Ireland into a modern industrial country and to achieve a greater social and economic equality. The economic policies. 900 million in investment and the creation of 5 economic zones to update industries and create new ones. Modernisation of the road and railway network. Greater cooperation with southern governments to improve economic development. The creation of a new city to be called Craigavon, based on the existing towns of Lagan and Portadown. Setting up new university in Coleraine. The success of the policies. International companies set up factories in Northern Ireland, Michelin, Dewpoint, ICI and Grundig. The construction of a new motorway system was started. An oil refinery was set up in Belfast. A new airport was under development. Links with the Republic resulted in signing the agreement of the supply of electricity from the south. Over 35,000 new jobs were created. The failure of the policies. The famous shipbuilding company, Harland and Wolff, was finding it difficult to compete in the world market. The government had to give it money to keep it going. Unemployment stayed at 7 to 8%. 20,000 jobs were lost in traditional industries, such as the linen industry. Several companies refused government grants to set up factories west of the River Bann because it was seen as too remote. The political policies. O'Neill's economic and political policies were linked. He believed that Northern Ireland couldn't become more economically developed without improving relations with the Republic of Ireland and with the nationalists in Northern Ireland. Relations with the Republic of Ireland. O'Neill met the Irish Prime Minister Sean Loomis at Stormont in January 1965. This was symbolic as it was the first time the leaders of North and South had met for 40 years. 4 weeks later, O'Neill went to Dublin for the second meeting. the two leaders discussed ways in which the two countries could develop economic cooperation. Relations with Northern Ireland nationalists. O'Neill tried to improve relations with Northern nationalists in a number of ways. He visited Cardinal William Conway, the Archbishop of Armagh, and spiritual leaders of Ireland's Catholics. He offered official sympathy to the Catholic Church of the death of Pope John XXIII in 1963. He visited schools and hospitals run by the Catholic Church. He increased government funding to Catholic hospitals and schools. What impact did O'Neill's economic plus political reforms have? Unionist response. Some moderate Unionists supported O'Neill's reforms, while others feared that the reforms might undermine the position of unionism in Northern Ireland. O'Neill did not tell his colleagues in advance that he was going to meet Sean Loomis, shows that even O'Neill knew that there would be objections. Divisions between the OUP over the visit was clear when Brian Faulkner condemned O'Neill's failure to consult with his colleagues. Another person who objected the visit was Reverend Ian Paisley, moderator of the Free Presbyterian Church. Paisley objected to any kind of links with the South. He objected partly because of the strong position of the Catholic Church in the South, and also because the Irish Constitution laid claim on the north of Ireland. In the years that followed, support for Paisley grew as many Protestants became concerned about O'Neill's policy. The results of the 1965 general election, with the OUP got 38 out of 52 seats, seemed to show that many people were satisfied with O'Neill's policies. The situation got worse for O'Neill. He banned the UVF following the murder of 2 Catholics by the organisation. He reduced support for him within the OUP. In 1966, O'Neill also became aware of a plan by some people within the OUP to replace him with Brian Faulkner. Nationalist response. O'Neill's reforms had mixed response from the nationalist community. At the beginning there was support. The visit of Loomis to Stormont was followed by the decision of the Nationalist Party to take up the role of official opposition in the Stormont for the first time in history. However, the optimism was followed by frustration that the better future of O'Neill had promised seemed not to be coming about. Nationalists were angered by the decision of the Prime Minister of Development, William Craig, to name the new town linking Portadown and Lagan, Craigavon, after Northern Ireland's first Prime Minister. There was also continued accusations that O'Neill's economic policy favoured the Protestant East at the expense of the Catholic West. Except for Derry, all places earmarked for economic development were in Protestant areas. There was also criticism of the fact that Northern Ireland's second university was to be set up in a mainly Protestant town of Coleraine, rather than the mainly nationalist Derry, Northern Ireland's second city. The various health and education bodies still had few Catholic members. The Northern Ireland Civil Rights Movement, 1967 to 1969. Northern Ireland's Civil Rights Association 6 aims. 1. Voting. Everyone over 18 has the right to vote. No multiple votes for business owners. 2. Housing. Council houses allocated more fairly. At this time, the only way you can get a vote is if you're a ratepayer owning a house or renting a council house, which Catholics rarely got. 3. Gerrymandering. An end to gerrymandering. Gerrymandering meant drawing up electoral boundaries so that one community gained over the other. 4. Government jobs. An end to discrimination in the allocation of government jobs. 5. Special Powers Act. An end to the Special Powers Act. These allowed the government to arrest and detain people without trial to see whether if they are guilty or not. 6. B Specials. For the B Specials to be banned. The B Specials was a Protestant-only branch of the RUC. Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association supporters. Catholics. Catholics felt they were discriminated against. The introduction of free education in the 1940s meant that there was now a new generation of Catholics who were educated and had jobs in professions. They now had the confidence to protest for equal rights. They also felt that the Nationalist Party in Northern Ireland, which represented their views, was not doing enough to fight for their rights. Protestants. Some Protestants had also come to believe that the situation in Northern Ireland had to change. They believed that if Northern Ireland became a fairer society for all people who lived there, then demands for United Ireland would lose support. Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association non-supporters. Many Unionists were suspicious of Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association. Some saw it as a front for the IRA, and that its real intention was to achieve a united Ireland, whilst others argued that its focus on discrimination against Catholics ignored the social and economic problems facing some Protestants. Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association trying to achieve its aims. NICRA organised peaceful marches to publicise its ideas, using the examples of the US Civil Rights Movement. The first march took place in August 1968 between County Tyrone and Coal Island and Dungannon. The march took place because of the decision to give a council house to a 19-year-old Protestant girl instead of a Catholic family in Dungannon. The aim was to march to Dungannon Square. Marchers were stopped from getting there by the police. An alternative rally was organised at the police barricade and passed off without violence. The second march took place in October 1968. The aim was to highlight inequalities in council house allocation in Derry. The aim was to march from waterside area of the city to the city centre. In response, the Unionist Apprentice Boys organisations threatened a rival march. The government responded by banning all marches. NICRA went ahead anyway. The march was broken up by the police, with some marchers being injured. The march was attended by some members of Parliament and by TV crews. The police treatment of the marchers was seen on TV that night, not just in Northern Ireland but across the world. It was becoming clear to many observers that Northern Ireland was reaching a crisis. Further marches followed and violence resulted. As a result, tensions in Ireland increased. O'Neill's 5-point programme. The allocation of council housing on a point system. The replacement of Londonderry Corporation by a Development Commission. The removal of parts of the Special Powers Act. Reforms in local governments, including the ending of extra votes for business owners. The appointment of an ombudsman to investigate complaints. In December 1968, O'Neill made a TV broadcast to the people of Northern Ireland appealing to all sides of the community to stop the violence that had been growing. His appeal had limited effect. Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association called off its campaign of marching. However, some Unionists felt O'Neill was trying to give in to nationalist threats of violence and to pressure from the British government. Some people within O'Neill's own government criticised him. One of those was William Craig. O'Neill sacked Craig. The People's Democracy. The aims of the People's Democracy were: one man, one vote, fair electoral boundaries, council housing should be allocated on need, jobs on merit, free speech, repeal of the Special Powers Act. Burntoilet Bridge. People's Democracy announced that they were holding a march between Belfast and Derry from the 1st to the 4th of January 1969. The march was condemned by Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association and nationalist leaders. Fearing it would increase tensions, the march went ahead anyway. Most of the march was to go through Protestant areas. The police intervened and changed some of their route. Despite this, on the third day a confrontation took place. The marchers were attacked on Burntoilet Bridge. The police seemed to do little to protect the marchers from their attackers. Later that night, police rampaged through nationalist areas of Derry. This increased tensions. Reactions to Burntoilet. NICRA responded by starting another march again. The first march was held in Newry and resulted in violence. O'Neill set up a commission called the Cameron Commission to investigate the violence. This led to 2 members of his government resigning in protest. One of these was Brian Faulkner. He believed that O'Neill was a weak leader and was losing control of the situation. Other Unionist MPs began to agree with Faulkner. 30th of January 1969, 12 OUP members called on him to resign as Prime Minister. Instead, O'Neill decided to call a general election. He hoped that people in Northern Ireland would show their support for him in the election. He called it the crossroads election because he believed Northern Ireland was set up at a crossroads. It would go down the road of peace, or it would go down the road of violence. The crossroads election, February 1969. The election didn't give O'Neill the result he was after. There was a reduction in unionist support, and those OUMP members who were elected were divided about what to do about the situation in Northern Ireland. O'Neill himself hoped for Catholics would vote for him, but there was little evidence. He struggled to get re-elected. Reverend Ian Paisley stood against him in the election and gained a lot of votes from people who would have previously voted for O'Neill. Aftermath of election. Increasing violence made O'Neill's position even worse. A series of bombings took place. The IRA was blamed, but they were actually carried out by loyalist, extreme unionists, in an attempt to force him out. It was clear that O'Neill's position as leader of the OUP had been weakened. Many OUP MPs did not want him as their leader. The recent bombings made him seem even less in control. 28th of April, he resigned. He said that the bombing campaign quite literally blew him out of office. O'Neill was replaced by Major James Chester Clark. Clark had opposed some of O'Neill's reforms, but now that he was Prime Minister, he decided to continue with O'Neill's reforms. Escalation of political and civil unrest, Northern Ireland 1969 to 1972. The summer of 1969. O'Neill's resignation did not end tensions. Civil rights marches continued and rioting followed. As July-August marching season approached, many people were worried that the situation would get worse. The Unionist government was worried that the police would not be able to cope with the violence. The British government was worried about what was happening in Northern Ireland. The Southern government was worried for the safety of Catholics in Northern Ireland. To make matters worse, Loyalists were angry that the Unionist government was making too many concessions to Nationalists. Republicans were worried about the safety of the Catholic population. The Battle of Bogside, August 1969. Rioting took place in Derry following the annual Apprentice Boys Parade. The rioting lasted for 50 hours. This was one of the number of disturbances that took place in the summer of 1969. The British Army arrives August 1969. In August 1969, the British made the decision to send British troops to Northern Ireland to help restore order. Initially, the British Army was welcomed by nationalist community who believed the army came to protect them from the attacks. The Downing Street Declaration, August 1969. The British governments were very concerned about Northern Ireland. August 1969, the new Northern Ireland Prime Minister James Clark went to London to meet the British Prime Minister Harold Wilson. The outcome of the meeting was the Downing Street Declaration. This declaration aimed to reassure both communities. Nationalists were told every citizen of Northern Ireland is entitled to the same equality of treatment and freedom from discrimination as in the rest of the United Kingdom, irrespective of political views or religion. Unionists were told that Northern Ireland should not cease to be a part of the UK without the consent of the people of Northern Ireland. Additional reforms followed. The introduction of one man, one vote, and an end to gerrymandering. A committee on politicising was set up, led by Lord Hunt. The Stormont government agreed to set up the Scarman Tribunal to investigate the recent disturbances. A single housing authority was set up to replace local councils. Measures to prevent discrimination in public employment were announced. There were also measures to improve the economy. A £2 million programme of work creation schemes. An increase in government grants. Unionist reaction. Unionists reacted negatively to the reforms. They saw the reforms as concessions to nationalists. They were particularly angry when the Committee on Politicising led by Lord Hunt publicised its reports. It recommended the disarming of the RUC and the disbandment of the B Specials and the replacement with the Ulster Defence Regiment. Violence erupted on Belfast Shankill Road. Nationalist reaction. Nationalists reacted positively to the reforms. They saw the reforms as paving the way to a better future. The formation of the Provisional IRA. Many nationalists were angry with the IRA for failing to protect Catholics during the violence of the summer of 1969. For some, IRA stood for I ran away. The IRA was divided about how to respond. This led to the split in the movement. The official IRA, which continued to focus on establishing Socialist Ireland, and Provisional IRA, which saw itself as the defenders of nationalists in Northern Ireland. By 1970, the Provisional IRA had declared its objectives. Number 1, civil rights. Number 2, defence of the Catholic population. Number 3, destruction of the Stormont government. Number 4, getting the British out of Ireland. The Ulster Defence Association, UDA, was set up in September 1971. Its aim was to defend loyalists from IRA attacks. By the end of 1971, it had over 30,000 members. New political parties emerged. The Unionist parties. Ian Paisley set up the Democratic Unionist Party, the DUP, and was elected as MP. He was opposed to the Stormont government's policy of making concessions to nationalists. In April 1970, a new party called the Alliance Party was set up by Oliver Napier. His aim was to have a non-denominational party open to people of all religions and cultural differences. Nationalist parties. In August 1970, the Social Democratic and Labour Party, SDLP, was set up. It was led by the West Belfast MP Gerry Fitt, and the SDLP was set up because many nationalists felt that the National Party had failed to take lead on speaking up for the nationalist community during the violence of 1969 to 1970. The SDLP was a left-wing party wanting greater social equality. It also sought out the eventual reunification of Ireland. Internment and Bloody Sunday. 9th of August 1971, Faulkner introduced internment. It was a failure. The information used by the authorities to arrest suspects was out of date. Not one of the 452 men arrested was a leading member of the Provisional IRA. All those targeted were nationalists or civil rights supporters, despite the fact that a lot of the violence was being carried out by loyalists. The first loyalist was not interned until 1973. The introduction of internment led to an increase in violence. 143 people were killed from the introduction of internment at the end of the year. Unionists were happy at first, but less supportive when the policy of internment failed to deal with the violence. The UDA was set up as a response to the Republican violence December 1971. The UDA bombed McGurk's bar in Belfast, killing 15 people, the most single atrocity of the year. Nationalists saw internment as one-sided and open to abuse. It led to an increase in IRA membership. The SDLP called on people to withhold payment of rents and rates as a protest against internment. Civil marches against internment were organised. A march to Milligan internment camp in January 1972 was met with baton charges and CS gas from the army. Bloody Sunday, 30th of January 1972. On the 30th of January 1972, another march against internment was held in Derry. Riots started and the Parachute Regiment shot dead 13 men, 13 more wounded, one of whom later died from his wounds. The government set up an inquiry headed by Lord Whittaker. However, the inquiry failed to provide a satisfactory conclusion to the events of the day. This event became known as Bloody Sunday. Impact of Bloody Sunday. Unionists supported the government. While Unionists regretted the deaths, they argued that the march had been illegal and provocative. Nationalist hostility to the state increased. The British Embassy in Dublin was burnt down. IRA membership also increased. The British government was criticised by other countries for the way it was dealing with the violence in Northern Ireland. February 1972, a new organisation was set up, the Ulster Vanguard, led by William Craig. Its aims was to coordinate the activities of various loyalist groups. The British government was forced to conclude that Northern Ireland government was no longer capable of keeping law and order. Suspension of Stormont and direct rule, March 1972. March 1972, the NI Prime Minister Faulkner went to London for a meeting with the British Prime Minister Edward Heath. He was taken by surprise when Edward Heath proposed certain changes in Northern Ireland. Responsibility for security in Northern Ireland would be transferred from the Northern Ireland government to the British government. A referendum would be held on the future of the border. A Secretary of Northern Ireland would be appointed. Talks would be held with all political parties in Northern Ireland to attempt to set up a community government. Suspension of Stormont and direct rule, March 1972. March 1972, the NI Prime Minister Faulkner went to London for a meeting with the British Prime Minister Edward Heath. He was taken by surprise when Edward Heath proposed certain changes in Northern Ireland. Responsibility for security in Northern Ireland would be transferred from the Northern Ireland government to the British government. A referendum would be held on the future of the border. A Secretary of Northern Ireland would be appointed. Talks would be held with all political parties in Northern Ireland to attempt to set up a community government. Reactions of Northern Ireland government to these proposals. The entire Northern Ireland government resigned in protest. How the British government responded. Edward Heath responded by suspending the Northern Ireland Parliament. This was initially for a year, but it was later extended. This was called direct rule. Northern Ireland would be directly ruled by London. Reactions to the end of Stormont. Unionists were horrified. A series of strikes was organised by the Ulster Vanguard to protest at the closure of Stormont. Nationalists were pleased. They saw the closure of Stormont as an opportunity for a new beginning. The IRA was pleased at the ending of the Stormont Parliament, but it was also opposed to direct rule. It continued to aim for a united Ireland. The blackest year, 1972. 1972 turned out to be the worst year of the Troubles. By the end of the year, 496 people had lost their lives. 21st of July 1972, the IRA detonated 20 bombs around Belfast in just over an hour. 9 died in what became known as Bloody Friday. 31st of July, the IRA exploded a bomb in the village of Cloudy. 9 people lost their lives. The British government responded with Operation Motorman. Some parts of Belfast and Derry had become no-go areas for the police and army. The aim of the Operation Motorman was to reclaim controls of these areas.